Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. So today I want to talk about the new Drannor raid. I ran it this week on Lamania, the preview server. It was on preview. It is not yet in the game, but it is on preview. I have a lot of things to say, and as you might have seen by the title of this video, I'm quite disappointed, very disappointed in this raid. So let's just continue. So before we go any further, though, I want to say I am going to completely spoil the raid. So if you don't want spoilers on the raid, and I'm going to show some gameplay footage too that I'm going to edit in here. If you don't want to see that, if you don't want to hear how the raid works, then I would recommend clicking off this video now because I am going to spoil it. It's also, keep in mind, this is based on the Lamania preview. I knew nothing going into the raid. In the preview, I knew nothing about the raid. So it's possible the raid could change, and I hope it does. And it's also possible, I've missed things. I certainly don't know every single little tiny thing about the raid at this point. It's been one day. So if I get things wrong, apologies. Also didn't have a chance to run the raid on Reaper. So if it's slightly different on Reaper in terms of mechanics, apologies. Might have missed something. But I have a pretty good grasp. We did complete the raid several times, so I have a pretty good grasp of how it works. So I want to start with a summary of just how the raid works. And then I want to go on to my main feedback on it, which I did post on the DDO.com forums, 2 long posts, which I want to go through just to give my full thoughts on all this and why it disappointed me. So let's start with how the raid works. Basically, from what I've gathered in my first session, here's how it works in summary. You go into the raid. It's quite a small map, quite closed in. There's a hallways, one big main room. You have a Dracolich right in the first room, and the Dracolich is unfortunately the raid boss. We didn't get any brand new raid boss, no Hydra, anything like that, like people were wanting to see. We just got a Dracolich for the 5th time, I believe, in the game. So the 5th raid Dracolich boss, we've had a bunch of them. But anyways, you walk into that first room, you see the Dracolich. One of the mechanics of the raid is you need to have a tank hitting the Dracolich the whole time. If the tank's not in there on the Dracolich hitting it, then the party gets a fire dot that builds over time. But basically, tank stays on the Dracolich. Rest of the party goes north. You go fight a Merilith. You kill the Merilith. When you kill the Merilith, it spawns cracks in the walls. You click on those to go to 3 different smaller rooms. And if you don't click on that crack soon enough, then you get trapped in the Merilith room. You got to continue to fight her, but you kill her. You go to 3 outside rooms after you exit the Merilith room, kill some gatekeepers. You come back, you kill the Merilith again. When the Merilith dies, she spawns the phylactery, which is the Dracolich's phylactery. One person clicks on it. You go back to the room, the main big center room where the Dracolich is. The person with the phylactery has to stand in a dead magic zone. Once they get hit by a certain attack by the dragon, that destroys the phylactery, makes the dragon vulnerable to damage, and then you kill the dragon, and that's it. The raid's over. There are a few other things to mention here, though. Of course, it's not all there is to it. There's also an optional to the east that requires 6 runes to be clicked on. And to get this optional, you do get an extra chest. And to click on these 6 runes, you have to have 80 of each stat. So the entire party combined has to have, 80 wisdom, 80 intelligence, 80 dexterity, etc., for all the stats. If you have that in your party, you can get another chest. There's also traps in there as well that can be disabled. Throughout this quest, there's a lot of red name mobs with a lot of HP. There's a lot of the bone guard mechanic, like you see in other quests in Drannor, where you have to kill the bone guard first. And until you kill that bone guard, a different mob has high DR. There's also a chain lightning-like effect in the raid, which is kind of similar to the boom, as far as I can tell from say, like Fall of Truth, where you need to separate, the party needs to separate and run away from each other to like, not take that damage. But that's about it as far as the raid, as far as I've gathered. Again, this is first session. I could be missing things, but that's my understanding as of the recording of this video, at least. So that's it. Now let's get into my main critique, but I felt like I needed to explain the raid so you can understand the basis for my critique as I get into it later. So here we go. Let's switch over now to the forum posts and let's get to, my criticisms. So my main issue with this raid is the scope. So what do I mean when I say scope? I don't mean merely length. I mean the absence of interesting multiple phases that feel unique and that challenge the party in great ways, or also the scope of the raid, meaning a interesting map that just makes it feel epic. That's the main thing I was really disappointed about with this raid, okay? Essentially, I was expecting something along the lines of like a Temple of the Deathworm, a Curse of Strahd or Skeletons. I mean, all of those raids had a lot of work put into them. I mean, something like Deathworm, there's 2 different sections of that raid where you can have up to, where basically you have 3 different paths. Like only 2 show, 1 is randomly not there, but you basically have like all these interesting different rooms that were created for that raid that all offer different interesting challenges. That infight, really complex, really unique. Then you have something like Skeletons. Like that infight is great. Like I was happy with Skeletons in the Closet. You know, we only got 1 raid, but in Isle of Dread, and I really wish we would get 2 raids in expansions, but the fact is Skeletons was a very good raid. One of the best raids I've ever done. And this raid, the whatever this raid is called, Threats Old and New, it's not even close to a Skeletons level. Not just in the lack of interesting phases, the lack of a like more epic feel to it, the lack of a unique end boss. I know a lot of people are asking for Hydra. I don't know much about the lore aspect, but that's the big thing I was hearing. Out of all the monsters in Myth Drannor, are you telling me there's not some unique big bad we could be fighting that's not a Dracolich, which is something we've done before? I mean, the whole concept of this raid, which is get the phylactery, destroy the phylactery, kill the Dracolich, that's what we did in Temple of the Deathworm. You know, we need something unique. We need a different boss, which should be some kind of creature we've never fought before. This is a full expansion, and this is 1 raid, and this is the pinnacle of it, being the actual raid part of it. And we don't get any unique end boss. Like that's just nuts to me. So if we had 2 raids, I would feel a lot differently, but we don't. We have 1 raid. So two shorter raids, smaller scope raids, okay. But if this is going to be the only raid in a full expansion, then it needs to be a big, beefier raid. You know, I'm not saying that we can't. There isn't a place in the game for shorter raids. There certainly is. Like, all right, we have an adventure pack. Give us a short raid. You know, we get like a hunter hunted, fine. You know, we get a smaller scope raid. It's an adventure pack, fine. But for this is the pinnacle of a full expansion, which people paid a lot of money for, and we're getting a small scope raid. Really? It really, as I say here in the second sentence, it really concerns me, because if we're not getting one in a full expansion that only has 1 raid, I guess we're just never going to get complex raids again in DDO. They're all going to be simple and short. That's not okay. Not saying that short raids can't be fun. They can be, sure, but there also needs to be a more complex, deeper raiding experience for those of us who really enjoy raids. I mean, that's a significant piece of the population, you know, and there should be, that aspect should be catered to as well. So what do I mean by more scope? More mechanics, more phases, a unique end boss, you know, things I mentioned before. No puzzles. There's no puzzles at all in this raid. I mentioned some things that are more like things I would like that I know some players won't agree with, like a platforming optional section or something. But we needed just more phases. So I get into more specifics, and we'll get into my second post here, more specifics in terms of what I would like to see in a raid. But yeah, I mean, I guess there's not too much else to say about this first post. I kind of covered everything, I guess. I just think the devs can do better than this. Okay, let's talk about some ideas. So I think one thing that makes raids great is a puzzle phase. Some things I would suggest is for an idea for a puzzle phase. So puzzle phase idea number 1. I think it would be interesting. I've always liked the mechanics in raids where the party kind of gets divided up and has to work together to achieve a common goal. So like for a puzzle phase, I think a quest that's very underrated in DDO is Another Man's Treasure. I really like the rat maze there. So I would love the idea of let's have 4 mazes in that vein. Let's split the party into 4 groups, force a split there, and each group has to do their maze and stand on a platform at the end. Everyone gets to a platform and stands on the end, 1 person on each maze. There you go. Go to the next phase. I think that is just a simple example of an interesting puzzle phase. So I would love to see raid. And that's the big thing about raids. Like this raid doesn't really have a variance. It's pretty much just a DPS beatdown, the Myth Drannor raid. So I would love to see like and that's fine. We can have a hack and slash. Hack and slash is fun, but it shouldn't be the whole raid, right? So how about a hack and slash section, puzzle phase section, maybe 1 more section like a platforming section or a swim or something, and then we go to the infight phase. So you see what I'm saying in terms of scope? We need to have multiple unique varying phases. Another idea for a puzzle phase. The statue puzzles in Myth Drannor. So those were like criminally underused in the expansion. And if you go watch the podcast I did, so if you don't know, I did a 3-hour plus review of Myth Drannor expansion. It's Axelcast episode 7 with a bunch of other DDO content creators. But we talked about this, and I mentioned this in that podcast, where the statue puzzles were very underused. They're only used in one quest. So why not have a puzzle phase that incorporates that Myth Drannor puzzle, right? So let's have a puzzle section kind of like the light puzzle section in Shroud. Let's split the party into, like, you go to that phase when you enter the puzzle phase, split up the party into 8 to 12 different rooms at random. Like, you get put in a random room, and each room has a statue puzzle to do, and everyone has to do their statue puzzle. The one thing I've always liked about raids is having individual smaller puzzles for the party to do so that everyone can participate, rather than have something like Reaver's Fate, where you have one big puzzle that only one person can really do. More interesting in a raid if everyone in the party has a meaningful role. So let's do that. Let's have the statue puzzles, 8 to 12 different rooms. I mean, depending on what the devs want to do there, you can have a statue puzzle in each. You got to do your statue puzzle to open your door to move on to the next phase. For people who struggle with the puzzles, we can have things for that. So let's allow, like the light puzzle phase in Shroud, let's let the doors make them pickable. I would even go farther and just have a lever, but let's have a 1-minute load bar on that lever to open the door, just so that incentivizes and encourages people to learn the puzzle, so that the fastest run would be everyone in the party actually participating in doing the puzzle. But if you can't do the puzzle, for some reason you struggle with it, that's fine, but it is going to take you a little bit longer to get through that phase. I think that would work well. So that's another example of a puzzle phase they could do. So I'd love to see something like that put into a raid. So other phases I mentioned here, just other random ideas. Red light, green light, and Deathworm. I know some people like to complain about that. Honestly, I think most people blame lag for that, but really they're just not stopping on a yellow light and they're trying to run to the last minute. I personally don't hardly ever have issues with red light, green light, and Deathworm when I run it. But anyways, if you just stop at the yellow light, you're just not going to die. But anyways, that has only been used once ever in the game. So if they are going to reuse something, that's an example of a thing they should reuse. It's only been used once. So it would be cool to see that in a different raid, in a different context, in a different situation. So I think of, like, put a room like that in the raid, and let's have mobs in there. I would make it kind of like an obstacle course. I think that would be interesting. But yeah, another idea of something they could put in the raid that wouldn't be too, do I want to see them completely reuse the mechanic? Not really, but I'm trying to be reasonable here and do things that they could actually do, because there obviously is only a certain amount of man hours they can reasonably put into a development of a raid. They do have to, stick to a budget and all that. Okay, another thing I think would be cool would be a tower defense phase. I really like tower defense games, and it could work in DDO. So here I described this. You could have a room with 4 towers, a ballista on each tower. Let's say you have waves coming in at the party. You have to use the ballistas to hit mobs coming in. Once you hit a mob, maybe you have 4 levers that have to be pulled behind the towers. Pull the levers, and it will kill the mob after they've been hit with the ballista. Think something like the crab quest in Isle of Dread or something, kind of like that, except probably a little bit more straightforward in terms of what you're shooting at. But anyways, something like that. You shoot a mob, and then you have to confirm the kill. Even kind of like Deathworm, when you have to bring a mob down, and then you have to pull levers at the same time to confirm the kill. I think that would be interesting. I always thought the ballistas were a good idea in theory. They just were kind of used in not the best ways, and I think some quests were just not designed the best, like the capstone quest at Epic Thrill Cove, for example. I think there is some potential there with ballistas. Anyways, that's just an example. Like, I'm not tied strictly to any of these ideas. It's just giving examples of things the devs could and should do to make a raid a multi-layered experience that actually gives you different challenges a party has to work towards and work together to overcome, and something that's not just a DPS beatdown, where what really matters is how much DPS do you have, how much MRR do you have. Let's just and that kind of dictates your success, right? I like mechanics where the party has to work together that aren't necessarily reliant on DPS. Not that there couldn't be during the tower defense phase. Here I'm suggesting there could be some mobs that spawn near the lever pullers to give the rest of the party stuff to do to defend the lever pullers. So I don't know. That's just something I thought up today. I thought it would be fun to work in some kind of power defense thing. I threw in the platforming option here because I like platforming in DDO. I know that seems to not be a super popular opinion, but I think it would be cool if they did something. And there's a way to put this into a raid in a way that it doesn't force people to do it who don't like platforming. And when I say platform, I mean like, Mario stuff, like jumping over platforms. I think it would be cool to maybe at the end of a raid have the raid end, and once the raid ends, another path opens. Like, the raid ends, you kill the raid end boss, you loot the chest, and maybe there's another path that opens, and people who want can go down that platforming path and attempt that challenge, maybe make it just as difficult as the Snow Peaks challenge, the climb. And maybe at the end have a chest with just a couple more ingredients. Don't put named loot there so it doesn't feel required for people. Make it probably not completely worth your time, but people who want a couple extra ingredients could go do that and get that. People who don't want to do that can exit out of the raid. So yeah, those are just some ideas, guys. Also, and I mentioned the end fight here, which I would like to see actually Wild Magic incorporate. I feel like Wild Magic was like the main thing about Mr. Drannor, one of the main themes, right? And it really, I think they went a little bit too lenient with it. I know that with Wild Magic, they didn't want to force it on players and like in a request where everything is Wild Magic all the time. But I think in a raid, it's okay to, in some situations, maybe require players to engage in it. Because right now, like, I don't know anyone who even uses or cares about the Wild Magic areas in Mr. Drannor. So I think it would be cool if in the infight, maybe the boss spawns a Wild Magic area or teleports you to a Wild Magic area or something that would force the party to be in a Wild Magic area, at least during a portion of the infight. I think would be interesting. I mean, maybe make the whole thing Wild Magic, but probably the devs wouldn't be willing to do that. So maybe have the mob, like the main boss, cast teleport on you or something or whatever. But yeah, so those are just some ideas. And I think the other main thing, the big thing is that I've already mentioned, is the lack of a unique end boss. Like, so many people were mentioning a Hydra. It is not okay to have the pinnacle of a full expansion be a 5th Dracolich. There has to be something. I mean, you all tell me who are lore masters in Myth Drannor and pen and paper, because I'm certainly not. There has to be some kind of big bad we could be fighting that's something unique and new. But yeah, guys, that's just my thoughts on the raid. Overall, disappointed with it. I hope that the devs take this back to the drawing table and just honestly just tear it up. I'm not really sure that a lot of the raid is so interesting to be worth saving. I guess since at this point they've already developed it. I guess at this point, I mean, put it in the game and maybe, I guess it's unrealistic to expect them at this point since they've already announced one raid to just throw in another one for Myth Drannor. But I would just love to see this reworked and make something different out of it. I mean, I just don't think the way that the raid exists now, it's not that it's bad. It's not that it's unfun. It's just, it's not rising to the level of a full expansion with one raid, right? This is the pinnacle of raid development in DDO. This is a full expansion. They only do this once every other year. If they're not going to make a complex layered raid that really has some meat on the bone, they're never going to do it. So are they just never going to make complex raids again? We just get so few of them. And when we do get them, half the time they're revamped raids. It just feels bad as someone who enjoys raiding more than anything else in DDO. And it's just like the content these days is so sparse for raiding. It's so sparse. It's just, yeah, it's just disappointing, guys. So let me know what you think. Comment below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? This is what I honestly think. And yeah, I'll read your comments. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Take care.